Good evening, everyone. Today we were asked to discuss the research topic or proposal that we had, and I chose the Siege of Yorktown. More specifically, I chose to focus on the joint Franco-American army and the key French involvement in the siege and really ending the American Revolution itself. The major idea behind this and the initial question that I had was um, did the did the colonists win the American Revolution or American War for Independence solely, or was the introduction of France in 1780 and 1781 key to ending the war? Um, so I'll kind of start, I guess, from the end of it, but the short answer to the question is yes, and I'll explain why here. So there are three main causes. In about 1780, the Count de Rochambeau is introduced to General George Washington's army, who at the time is stationed up near New York, kind of near Newport. They are doing their best to keep Clinton's army busy, ensure that Clinton can't send more forces down to the south of Cornwallis, and he is basically beleaguered. His army is kind of wore down, and they're just playing the cat and mouse game. In the south, Cornwallis is having stunning victory after stunning victory. The Battle of Camden, where you see him basically secures all of South Carolina, the fall of Charleston. A little bit later, through Cowpens and a couple other smaller engagements, he decides to pull his force and head up into Virginia, kind of try to split the colonies in half. The Loyalists weren't as loyal as Britain hoped down in the south, and they figured that maybe they split the north and southern campaigns in half, that could be more successful. So the French decide to begin direct intervention and direct integration with the Continental Army. So the Comte de Rochambeau is introduced in about May of 1780 to Washington's army. He brings with it much needed men and supplies, about 6,000 men to be specific, field artillery pieces, siege cannons, food, weaponry, basically everything that you would bring if you were going to go to war. And that really bolsters Washington's confidence and really throughout the Continental Army. It makes it seem like now that things are feasible, that they could really get a good decisive victory with a combined force. The next piece of involvement that's key to France's, really ensuring the victory of the Continental Army at the siege is the Battle of the Capes. So the army survives the winter of 1780 and 1781. There are some communications between Admiral de Grasse, that's down in the West Indies, protecting French interests. He is then tasked to come up north. This is where things get a little confusing, I think, at times. The French decided ahead of time that a campaign in Virginia was much more likely to succeed. Washington had hoped that they would attack Clinton in New York, but I think the Comte de Rochambeau is right. It would have taken a full French armada and thousands of more troops than they could muster in much more time. Clinton was vastly more prepared to defend New York than Cornwallis was to defend in Yorktown and in Gloucester. So the Battle of the Capes happened in September. Admiral de Grasse steams north, gets into the Chesapeake Bay. Admirals Graves and Hood from the British Army come down through New York. They link up with one another. They enter the bay and catch de Grasse completely by surprise. But whether it's fate or divine intervention or good just sailorship, de Grasse inflicts massive casualties. With nearly half of his force inland, which is always an interesting point to me. About half of his officers were off ship at the time. The Battle of the Capes ends in about one day. France loses, I think, about 5 to 6 key vessels. They kind of skirt around each other for a couple more days, and then they both don't really want to make contact for fear of losing more ships or more men. And at a certain point, the British decide to steam back north and kind of collect themselves and figure things out. And it's key to the Franco-American force at the siege of Yorktown because for the first time the British lose the one thing that they had maintained the entire time, and that is the superiority on the water. Clinton can no longer supply himself. Cornwallis can no longer supply himself at Yorktown. Cornwallis can no longer be supported by Clinton. Cornwallis can no longer move his force freely like he had been for the last 2 years down in the south. This is a devastating blow, and we'll see how it plays in here in a second. Now the joint siege itself, and kind of depending upon where you ask, it really started, in late September, around about the 28th. The joint force, Rochambeau and Washington, leave Williamsburg, Virginia, with Washington at the head of the army and really two flanks, a left and a right flank. One of them pretty much purely continental, and the other flank is basically purely French with Rochambeau at the front of it. They march down south, in about September 28th-ish. They get down towards Yorktown and Gloucester. The French fire the first really volley against Cornwallis, and the siege begins. Cornwallis never thought that he would be in a siege. He, writes to Clinton that, they're well defended. They can kind of move if they need to. Even with the loss of the army, he's not overly concerned. But when the joint Franco-American force gets there, their concerns really rise. The key to this, though, and really what I tried to draw out in my research is that this whole thing rested on the French involvement with the Continental Army. It is a Continental-led French-American force that would do everything together. They would dig the first two parallels together, 1 and 2, towards redoubts 9 and 10. They would attack the redoubts with French and American artillery, dividing the task. They would divide the task of building the parallels. They would divide the task of seizing the two main redoubts, 9 and 10, which were absolutely crucial to the defense of Yorktown. They would continue to besiege Yorktown through siege fires in late October together. Around about the 16th or so, Cornwallis offers his initial, terms of peace. They agree upon them. They decide to capitulate his army, and Cornwallis surrenders to the joint force headed by Washington. I want to bring up one thing real quick that I found very interesting about this specific piece. I'm sure we've kind of heard about it, but when they surrendered, obviously everyone knows the story that Cornwallis doesn't come out because he's ill, supposedly. He sends out General O'Hare, who is a lifelong British officer, fought in the 7 Years' War, most likely knows the difference between a French soldier and a Continental soldier, most likely could have identified, I would argue, General George Washington and General Rochambeau pretty easily. O'Hare attempts to surrender to Rochambeau. Rochambeau denies, pushes him over towards Washington. Washington then denies and pushes him over to his aide, who then accepts the surrender. I think it's really key to this in my research specifically because why would O'Hare attempt to do that? And really, I couldn't find anything in historical context, whether going through Cornwallis's, personal writings or Tarleton's personal writings or anything like that. But what I surmise is that, and I believe that the British didn't want to surrender to the Continental Army. I think that they wanted this to be a French victory, a British loss to a French force supported by the Continental Army. And, I think that we're lucky. History does Rochambeau very well in this, that he pushes off the acceptance of surrender, ensuring that it is seen as a victory by the Continental Army and not by the French army supported by the Continental Army. And really the end state of my findings, and I kind of, put it together in one quick sentence, is that the research shows that, without the integration French forces in early 1780, 1781, that it is very unlikely that Washington's army could have won this decisive battle that would have inevitably led to the end of the American Revolution. It is almost irrefutable, I would argue, that without French siege cannons, without French expertise in conducting siege operations, without the Continental's expertise of the land of Yorktown of Virginia itself, of operating in the region, without the joint capability to speak to the Admiral de Grasse, and without the joint capability of being able to involve the Virginia militia, which I really didn't talk about, but was pretty key during the operation. it's pretty apparent that Washington would not have been able to do this alone. And that's kind of the pullout that I got from the end of my research. I want to take a second to wish everybody the best of luck on their research assignment. I look forward to learning about everybody's through our last post together. I hope to see you guys again in other classes. Best of luck and God bless.